Yo guys, Punkrat with another video. 3 weeks, my friends. 3 weeks and we can finally return home. The universe has been restored to its rightful order, and World of Warcraft can be fun again. It'll be hard to log off rather than hard to log in for the first time in almost a decade. Things are about to change for the better. Vanilla is basically an entirely different game, only similar on the surface to BFA. And one of the key differences is the itemization. With this might come maybe some confusion for some of you guys. You might not know what kind of itemization to prioritize, or who knows, you might even glance over an item that you think is no bueno, which is actually quite good. So with that, let's go over some widely misunderstood or underestimated items in Classic WoW. I'll be sticking to pre-raid and raid items solely rather than lower level items because that's where it actually matters. And this information will of course be useful as you're gearing out for raids in the first phase of Classic. Here we go, so we got the most underrated items in Classic WoW endgame. Let's get into it. Alright, so the first item we got is called Heart of Wormthalak. It drops off the last boss in LBRS Lower Blackrock Spire, Wormthalak. So on first glance, it may seem pretty average. It says chance to bathe your melee target in flames for 120 to 180 fire damage. Nothing too special, but this item has its situational uses where it's actually quite good, and for certain classes, it's actually one of the best trinkets in the game. So in general, as pretty much any melee DPS, this is a pretty good trinket, especially in the earlier days when your character is less affected by power creep. The actual just flat damage from this is pretty significant. On a Fury Warrior, a Rogue, you name it, it's pretty damn good. In PvP on rogues, it's really good, especially in combination with your poison. So as a rogue, if you're locking up a warrior, let's say, or any plate-wearing enemy in a full stun combo, and you have constant little micro elemental blasts going on that target from either weapon procs, this trinket, or your poisons, for instance, your instant poison or whatever poisons that you plan on using, all of those little spell damage procs actually will add up to be a decent amount, especially on a plate-wearing target since it's bypassing his armor. What's really interesting about this trinket is that it actually has a chance to crit, so the spell damage or the fire damage proc can crit. And another interesting aspect is that you can proc the on-hit effect while in cat form, so it's actually a really good trinket for feral druids, let's say. Now, as I just stated, it's actually one of the better trinkets for a couple different classes, and the one class that it's really good on, at least from what we understand with current proc rates, is the Ret Paladin. So with a lot of theory crafting that's been done and simulation based on damage, it's actually one of the best trinkets and arguably one of the best in slot trinkets for many raid tiers for Ret Paladins. I like to think of this trinket as the welfare version of the Dark Moon card Maelstrom. And as a Ret Paladin, from what I understand, the best two trinkets that you could use are actually Heart of Wormthalak and Dark Moon card Maelstrom. I was raiding in a pretty strong guild on Phoenix a while ago, and we had a feral druid in that guild who was using this trinket, and he pulled some really surprising numbers, and clearly he knew what he was doing. He was one of the few feral druids that would actually compete on the damage meter in the entire server. So yeah, if you're a melee DPS and you just happen to be doing LBRS and it drops, then don't overlook it, it's quite good. Alright, so this one, for my vanilla veterans out there who know everything about the game, every little detail, and are constantly correcting me, then you're probably gonna already know this one and find that it's really obvious. But for those of you guys that are actually newer to vanilla, or never really played it seriously and are really looking forward to get into it this time, this might be news to you. So there's this item called Edgemaster's Handguards. It's a BOE world drop male gloves that have a really unique sort of itemization style to them. So off first glance, you might look at this, and if you don't understand how vanilla itemization works, you might just say, there's no real stats that I can recognize here. There's no crit, there's no attack power, there's no strength, agility, nothing, so it seems kind of weird. But if we take a look at the tooltip and we read, it says increases axes +7, daggers +7, and swords +7. That's referring to weapon skill, and weapon skill is probably one of the most important stats for melee in the entire game. It increases their hit chance against higher level mobs, so bosses are level 63, and reduces the damage reduction on their glancing blows. So for single target boss DPS, these are pretty much the best melee warrior gloves in the game until I think Cthulhu. And it's a level 44 world drop, so you could pretty much get these while doing Zul'Farrak and have the best gloves in the game. And if you are so lucky to have that happen to you, you pretty much just buy your epic riding, because I've seen these gloves sell for easily 1,000 gold. Now we could piggyback off of this and just talk about weapon skill in general. There's so many items out there that you might overlook because you don't understand weapon skill and how important it is. We've got Aged Core Leather Gloves and Molten Core, which as a dagger rogue are incredibly good, but you might look at them at first glance and see strength and just be a bit confused. But these gloves are incredibly good if you're using daggers. We've got Obsidian Aged Blade, which is also in Molten Core, and it's a pretty damn good two-hander, where in the early days you could actually get away with running two-handed Fury DPS. You might actually see the sword drop, and it might be better than your current setup with dual wielding. Once Dire Maul is released, we've got Distracting Dagger, which is an incredible offhand dagger for dagger rogues with a 1.3 weapon speed proccing poisons like crazy. We've got Mugger's Belt, which is just a great belt. We got Maladath, which is in Blackwing Lair, and everyone knows how good this is as an offhand. And in AQ40, we've got the Anubisath Warhammer, which again, off first glance, you might not think much of it. But by the time you get into Nax, there's two really strong maces. There's the Castigator and Misplaced Servo Arm, which also drops off trash. So if you have one of those maces in your main hand, this is pretty much the best offhand mace that you can pair with it, giving the increased mace skill to affect both maces. So in general, I guess just don't overlook weapon skill. Whenever you see weapon skill on an item, it's generally incredibly good. And in my time, I've seen so many dagger rogues overlook the Aged Core Leather Gloves, and it boggles the mind, you know. Just because they see 15 strength, they think, this doesn't seem very good, but that +5 dagger skill is insanely powerful. So this item, you're probably going to see it around quite a bit because it's relatively easy to get. It's a two-hander that drops in Zul'Gurub with a really nice equip on hit effect. It's called Halberd of Smiting, which is a nice polearm with a 3.5 second attack speed and an equip chance on hit effect that says chance to decapitate the target on a melee swing, causing 452 to 676 physical damage. This two-hander is really good on a rep paladin, and it's also quite good as an entry-level two-hander for PvP on a warrior. The proc is pretty good for a two-hander, it procs relatively often, but what's really interesting, again, just like Heart of Wormthalak, is that it can actually crit. So it's nice little additional damage on top of your burst combos. And you could imagine with a rep paladin who's stacking Reckoning or getting Seal of Command procs that this proc would be really nice in combination with those extra hits. So it drops in Zul'Gurub, which is the entry level raid that a lot of people can do. So if you have just a warrior alt and you want to PvP on it but you don't have a two-hander, this weapon could easily open the door for you to have great fun on an arms warrior in Warsun Gulch or Arathi Basin. The damage proc is quite hard hitting, and when it crits in a full combo, so let's say on a Mortal Strike combo you get a Wind Fury proc and you get this to proc and everything crits, you could imagine how much damage that would be back to back in one global. Super satisfying and relatively underrated, I'd say. So if you see Halberd of Smiting and you need a two-hander, don't overlook it. So this one's in the same line as the Halberd. It's another weapon with a sweet on-hit proc. It's called Gore Sun Razor. It's a high-level world drop which is quite unique. It's actually one of the best tanking items in the game. So if you guys look at the tooltip, you'll see that it has a 1.3 second fast attack speed. I'm pretty sure that that's the fastest weapon in the game, if I'm not mistaken. And if you guys understand weapon speed when it comes to tanking, the faster the better. So having the fastest weapon in the game on a tank allows you to generate a good amount of rage and also allows you to generate rage quickly. Like immediately you just stab the target that you're trying to engage with, get a bit of rage and can sunder immediately. It also has a chance on hit effect that blasts the target for 75 to 105 fire damage, which, considering the actual attack speed of the weapon, procs more often than you'd think. And on top of that, it has +10 fire resistance, which is really good in the early days. This dagger is one of the best tanking weapons that you can use in the first couple phases of Classic WoW. Not only because of the weapon speed and the proc, but the fact that it gives fire resistance, which is really important during Molten Core and can be quite useful in Blackwing Lair. You're going to see a lot of these. A lot of the main tanks in the top guilds on your server are most likely going to use this. That's how it was in Nostalrius. I remember inspecting so many main tanks, or just tanks in general, in some of the top guilds, and even in my guild I was raiding in Pleasure Town Adventures, if you guys know that guild, and our main tank was rocking this. It's also a pretty decent offhand for Hemo rogues in PvP, who are stacking elemental procs, maybe Maelstrom Trinket, Heart of Wormthalak, things like that, maybe in combination with a Misplaced Servo Arm. It's a really great dagger, and I think a lot of people just aren't aware of it, so I'd say it's relatively underrated because of that. So if you're a tank and you see one on the auction house for like 100, 150 gold, I'd snag that bad boy. Although you're probably not going to get it for that price. Now this one is another trinket, and by no means is this a top tier item, it's just not as bad as you might think it is. It's called Venomous Totem, and it has an on-use effect that says increases the chance to apply rogue poisons to your target by 30% for 20 seconds on a 5-minute cooldown. It drops off Broodlord Lash Lair in Blackwing Lair, and it's a rogue specific trinket. There's a bunch of different class specific trinkets in Blackwing Lair. Now this trinket is actually pretty decent. It's good in PvE and it's also pretty good in PvP. It's useful in both. It's kind of similar to what I was talking about earlier with Heart of Wyrmthalak and Maelstrom, where you can run this sort of on-hit effect rogue build where you're relying on your poisons and magic on-hit effects. In private servers, this was actually a massive thing because on certain servers, poisons and on-hit effects actually scaled with spell power. But in actual retail vanilla or classic WoW, I don't think that that's going to be the case. But either way, it's pretty damn good. I mean, 30% is a huge increase, especially if you already have improved poisons. You can constantly be proccing instant poisons over and over and over again, or if you really want to make sure that your crippling poison lands on your opener because it's super important, let's say against a warrior or whatever target that you may be fighting, this is a pretty decent trinket. It's useful to have in your inventory, and if you have another one that's on cooldown, you just want to reset and swap this one on, it's pretty viable and it's good. Like, if you don't have anything better and nobody wants this, or if you just want to have a cheesy trinket that's quite situational, you could pick this one up. I've just seen tons of people pass on it before when you might as well take it. This one's another trinket, and it's generally only used in PvP, and again, it's quite situational. It's called Barov's Peasant Collar, and it has an on-use effect that says calls forth 3 servants of the House of Barov that will fight, cook, and clean for you. And I mean, that's sort of, I guess, just a little playful tooltip. What it actually does is just calls 3 minions that end up fighting for you. Now this is quite useful as a PvP trinket, and a lot of people tend to use it. It's situational, but I'd say the main strength of it is the fact that it calls 3 minions. So if you understand how spell pushback works in classic WoW, every time someone who's trying to cast a spell, if they don't have a shield on themselves, takes damage, their spell will be pushed back for each auto attack depending on their talents, if they have talents to compensate for that mechanic. The fact that it calls 3 individual mobs that are all hitting that target can actually push back the spell cast quite significantly. So if you're playing a warrior and you're fighting against a mage, you summon the 3 minions on him, and maybe he's trying to cast a pyroblast or a spell on top of, after he's polymorphed you, and you might just be pushing back his cast over and over again. He's still taking damage, and it's just annoying to deal with. I've also seen healers use this, so while they're trying to just live and heal, they'll call the minions to attack the person that's trying to kill them. They'll put maybe a Shadow Word Pain if it's like a priest, I guess, and just try to live while the minions in the dot just do damage. It's almost like the way Shadow Fiend works in the Burning Crusade. Not exactly, but the same kind of play style. Really situational, kind of a weird trinket, but it's quite easy to get. You get it from a quest called The Last Barov in Western Plaguelands. Anyone can get it. You should probably do it while you're leveling up and just sort of have it in your inventory, and if ever you have a use for it, use it up. Some people just kind of think it's useless and vendor it or disenchant it, but I like to use it. So this next item is actually a druid specific leatherworking helmet. It's called Wolfhead's Helm. It's actually a level 40 helmet, so you might not think much of it when you look at it, and it doesn't really give any stats aside from just some spirit. What's really important though is the equip. So if we read the tooltip, it says, when shapeshifting into cat form, the druid gains 20 energy. When shapeshifting into bear form, the druid gains 5 rage. What's really important here is the cat form one, where it says that you gain 20 energy. This helmet is actually the best in slot Feral Druid DPS helmet from Molten Core and all the way through Nex. There is no better helmet. The reason why it's so good is you pair that equip effect with the restoration talent, the first tier restoration talent called Führer. So when maxed out, Führer gives you a 100% chance to gain 40 energy every single time you shapeshift back into cat form. This enables the Feral Druid to do something called power shifting, where you're going to be dumping out your entire energy pool in cat form, shapeshifting out of cat form, and then going back into cat, gaining 60 energy every single time you do that with the helmet, allowing you to keep shredding and keep generating combo points. It's a really cool item that literally changes the way that you play the game as a Feral Druid. And it's also the item that helps make Feral Druids relatively viable if played right. It's a bit micro-intensive, I'd say kind of on the tedious side, but if you really enjoy that type of playstyle, it kind of makes it a lot more fun than maybe just spamming Shadow Bolt over and over again on a Warlock. So there you go, a level 40 leatherwork helmet that you might overlook is actually the best Feral Druid helmet in the entire game. So if ever you plan on playing Feral, make sure that this is your #1 priority. Not to mention, it's actually a really cheap helmet. It's really easy to get and you don't need leatherworking to actually make it for yourself. You could literally just buy it off the auction house for super cheap. Boom, you have the best helmet in the game. Pretty easy. This helmet shouldn't be overlooked. Let's move on. Now this is something that you're probably going to see around, at least to a certain extent. You might get it as a drop and you won't know what to do with it. It's called Warmonger and it's a two-handed sword that has 45 damage per second, 3.0 attack speed, 3 strength, and improves your hit chance by 3%. Now you might look at it initially, 3 strength, low damage, fast attack speed, kind of useless, especially for a melee. But it does have its uses. It's actually quite good as an entry-level pre-raid item on hunters. So if you want to itemize your hunter around this sword in the early days, you can just get a bunch of hit from it and then not have to worry about getting hit on other items, stack attack power on those items, or stack crit on all of the other items, and just sort of itemize your character around it. There's a lot of hunters that are going to be purchasing this sword either on the auction house, or if it drops for them, they'll end up using it. It's one of the more competitive pre-raid items when it comes to hunter. It's quite unique. I think it's the only item in the game that has 3% of pretty much any stat, from what I understand. And 3%, it goes a really long way in your hit rating. It's kind of a niche item. You might not think much of it, but it is quite sought after when it comes to hunters, and I've seen many of them use it throughout Blackwing Lair. So if you end up getting this one, understand that it has pretty decent value and don't undersell it. Or if you're a hunter and you're struggling with what weapons to choose, or you're below the hit cap, maybe you can buy this one off the auction house. It generally sells for a pretty reasonable price. Alright guys, that's it for this one. These are some of the items that come to mind which people tend to overlook. The most glaringly obvious ones to me, again, are the aged core leather gloves. Man, the amount of dagger rogues that I've seen skip over these boggles the mind. From what I understand, they're pretty much the best dagger gloves that you can get in the game till next, so keep an eye out for them if you plan on playing daggers. Hopefully you guys learned some new information on this one. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of itemization in Classic. If you liked the video and want to see more like it, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, of course, to be notified every time I post a new video. I post several videos every single week, you know the drill, soldiers. Follow me on Twitch since I'll be doing some scuffed green screen streams come Classic release. Join the Discord to be a part of the spiciest Classic community there is. Trust me on that one. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the other side. Peace.